free agency has officially started to dwindle down. But what I want to do today, I want to recap this entire offseason and give every NBA team an actual grade, just like school. Should be tons of fun. If you enjoy, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. Let's get into it. Starting off here with the Boston Celtics, of course, congratulations to them. I'll say that as much as I can until the next NBA season, even as a Cavalier fan. They won NBA championship number 18. They regained the NBA's lead, so shout out to them. Now, I gave them an A for the offseason for the simple fact that, look, they dominated last year. They had one of the best statistical lineups of all time, but they didn't try to get cute this offseason. Instead, what they did is they brought everybody back. They paid them enough money. Of course, they didn't explore trade talks or whatever. They brought back the same core, if not a couple extra pieces. So for that reason, Boston gets an A. But look out for them to get a guy like Gordon Hayward. I think he could be a nice punch off the bench. For the New York Knicks, I gave him an A+. Look, you lost Isaiah Hartenstein, but Tom Thibodeau has, throughout his entire coaching career, he has developed these defensive-level centers. Now, he's never had a facilitator like a guy like Hartenstein, but he's developed Joakim Noah. He's developed Mitchell Robinson. He's going to find another center, whether if it's someone they find out of the blue, whether if they re-sign Precious Achiuwa, or whether if they go out there and trade for a guy like Walker Kessler, they're going to find a big for next season. So I'm not worried about that. But because of the power of friendship, they get an A+. And then here for the Milwaukee Bucks, we've had some high grades. They're on the lower end, and this could be even lower if you ask me. But the Milwaukee Bucks, they didn't have a lot of cap space, so they couldn't do much. But for a team that made a big trade this time last year, going after Damian Lillard, this is a team that didn't put it together last year on the court. And of course, they had some head coaching drama, and you expected something to be done to push the needle outside of just staying healthy. But that didn't really happen. They drafted A.J. Johnson, drafted Tyler Smith. Both guys need a lot of development for the next level. But I guess the biggest thing they did this offseason was add Taurean Prince. As of right now, Malik Beasley is still a free agent. If they bring him back, this might be bumped up to a B- for bringing everybody back, but also adding guys like DeLon Wright and Taurean Prince. For the Cleveland Cavaliers, I'm a Cavs fan, and I'll say we give a B this offseason. Is it too high? Is it too low? I don't know. But I gave them a B because we drafted Jalen Tyson, the real JT, as I like to say. We brought in a new head coach in Kenny Atkinson. I think just getting a new head coach is good for our team and the morale around the team going forward. Of course, we just needed a different look somewhere, and JB Bickerstaff seemed to be the odd man out. And then, of course, we also re-signed Donovan Mitchell to a 3-year deal, a team-friendly deal, I might add. So I say we get a B for a decent offseason. Also, we didn't panic and trade one of those top-tier guys like Darius Garland or Jared Allen. I want to say they're top tier, but you get the picture. Orlando, I give them an A- for a lot of the same reasons as the Boston Celtics. They didn't panic. They didn't go out there after a first-round loss and make a big time trade. Instead, they stood pat. They brought everybody back, but they also added Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to the mix, a guy that's going to give you much-needed spacing, which you didn't have last year. But also, he's going to give you that veteran mindset and that veteran leadership for some of these young superstars, guys like Paolo Banchero, guys like, of course, Franz Wagner, who just got a huge contract. I didn't put him on here, but of course, he got a big deal as well. This is a team that I'm excited to see their future, especially now with some veteran leadership in that locker room, led by a guy like KCP, who's done it all on 2 different NBA teams. For the Pacers, you brought back Obi Toppin, you brought back Pascal, you traded, or I don't know if you traded for, you picked him up at free agency. Regardless, you now have James Wiseman to replace Jalen Smith, who you lost in free agency. If anything, that might be an upgrade with how James Wiseman was playing late last season for the Pistons. I think you get a B+, A- offseason for the Pacers, excuse me. You didn't have much cap space, but you brought everybody back, and you also added a solid centerpiece to, I guess, back up Miles Turner, which is something they haven't really had with Jalen Smith over the last couple of years. So I get solid offseason there for the Indiana Pacers. For the Sixers, they get the second A+ of the video. And I don't know if another team had a better offseason. They drafted Jared McCain. Of course, you can have your opinions about him, about the TikTok situation, but he's a very solid shot creator for this team off the bench. And as of right now, Kyle Lowry is not a 76er. So I think Jared McCain might end up being the backup guard for this team, but we'll have to find out. But not only that, they pick up Paul George, of course, in a massive deal. And then they also re-sign Tyrese Maxey. You re-sign Andre Drummond. You re-sign Kelly Oubre. You bring in Eric Gordon, and it didn't stop there. You also brought in Caleb Martin. This team has went from a team where it was kind of just Tyrese and Joel to now it is Tyrese, Joel, and Paul George. But then you have so much depth around those big three names that, Nick Nurse has a lot to play with here as far as lineup combinations, whoever they're playing in the playoffs. They have so many different lineups they can throw out there depending on who's hot, cold, or if they just want a different look. So the 76ers, this is the year for Joel Embiid to come out and prove he's a top 2, top 3 level NBA player. And just to prove that this is a big legacy here for Embiid to come out here, stay healthy, and dominate in the postseason, which he has yet to do. For the Miami Heat, I give him a B, B minus. I mean, they drafted Khalil Ware, who is playing good in Summer League so far. You re-signed Bam, Josh Richardson, and Kevin Love. Whatever, right? I mean, you kind of just brought everybody back. But you also lost some wing depth here in Caleb Martin, and you didn't really replace him at all. I understand they don't have the most cap space at all, but this is a team that, every year seemingly strives to be a play-in team. And if you're going to be a play-in team, at least have quality depth. This is a team that doesn't have a lot of that, and I'm worried about them as far as competing for a title, which Miami ultimately believes they can do. But again, I give them a B minus just because they didn't really do much. This could honestly be a C, C plus. For the Chicago Bulls, they are a to be decided because I want to see what happens with Zach LaVine. I want to see what happens with Lonzo Ball before the season kicks off. But they did draft Montez Buzelis. Of course, he's a very solid piece. They had a very questionable trade with, of course, Josh Giddey for Caruso straight up, but commit to the rebuild. You brought in Jalen Smith, solid center pickup, and also you re-signed Pat Will. So Patrick Williams now with no DeRozan, I think can finally get in his bag and I guess show you a different side offensively, which you haven't seen yet. So you're kind of paying for his potential there with that $90 million extension. But I think Patrick Williams has it in his bag. But I want to see what happens with Zach LaVine and Lonzo Ball, even Vucevic, even though he's only on a one-year deal before the season kicks off, because you got to think maybe, you got to think they're going to trade Lonzo, maybe even Vucevic before the season starts, because if Lonzo comes back and he's a shell of his former self, nobody's going to give you the deal that they would potentially give you now, right? Because we know what Lonzo Ball was before he got injured. But to be decided for the Chicago Bulls. For the Atlanta Hawks, you had the number 1 pick. It fell into your lap. Of course, you were not expected to get it, but that's the power of the lottery. You draft Zachary Rissace. You add Larry Nance and Dyson Daniels, of course, in a trade for DeJounte Murray. Now, the Atlanta Hawks, to me, I understand they lost the best player in that deal, but just like the LA Clippers, they might just be taking the less is more strategy and approach to things with this lineup. Of course, you might, less might be more with now Trae Young, with, of course, Zachary Rissace, and quality role players, of course, AJ Griffin. This just might be their approach, and I'm excited to see what they can do. But you had the number 1 pick, you drafted who you thought was the best player, and you also got some quality depth around a guy like Trae Young. So I give him a BB plus, even though that they had to trade DeJounte Murray. For the Brooklyn Nets, I gave him a B. And again, I might be too generous with these grades. You guys will have to let me know. But they had to trade Mikal Bridges. This is a guy that, whether the GM wants to say it or not, whether Shaw Marks wants to admit it, he probably requested a trade to go to New York, and they wanted to keep it under wraps. I'm happy that this front office sent Mikal Bridges where he wanted to go. That shows a lot about a front office. And again, in a big market, players are going to want to come to play for you if that's how you're treating your former players. But for Brooklyn, you get a lot of draft capital. With Mikal Bridges, you're probably a play-in team at your highest, at your peak, on a yearly basis. Maybe you sneak into a 6 seed, but you kind of saw the future if you're Sean Marks, where we don't want to be a play-in team. We are Brooklyn. We are a big market. We want to be a team that contends for a title like we were 5 to 6 years ago. So we traded Mikal Bridges for a lot of draft capital. We brought back maybe our best player in Nick Claxton. And then we also, of course, Bojan Bogdanovic via, of course, the trade for Mikal Bridges. But he's going to be a good veteran mouthpiece for guys like Lonnie Walker if you bring him back. Cam Thomas, of course. Some of these younger guys that just need that veteran leadership. So I give them a B minus here for trading Mikal Bridges. They're heading in the right direction, and that's the most important thing if you're Brooklyn. For Toronto, you just brought everybody back, and for that reason, well, I'll say this: you brought everybody back, but you also made some moves. You brought back Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly. You traded for Davion Mitchell, huge pickup in my eyes. You also drafted Jamal Sheed late in the second round. I love that pick for him. You just have two dogs on the defensive side of the ball now in the backcourt. Of course, Jamal Sheed played at Houston. They've been one of the best defensive backcourts in college basketball for the last couple of years. And again, he's just like Davion. They're just dogs on the defensive side of the ball, and every team needs that. But they brought in Bruce Brown as well. So Bruce Brown via trade, you have the cap space, right, to bring him in on that trade. And this is a guy where, sure, he's going to cost $23 million this year, but next year he's off the books. So you get a 1-year rental, and if he plays good basketball, trade him at the midseason mark to a team like Milwaukee for a late first-round pick, teams that are going to be desperate to give that capital up, or Denver, for example. But I think I really like the Toronto Raptors offseason. They didn't try and get fancy or cute. They brought their guys back, but also attacked the defensive side of the ball. I like that for the Toronto Raptors. For the Hornets, you didn't do much. You brought in, of course, via the draft, Tajane, but you also added Reggie Jackson via a trade. It wasn't much, right, for a couple second-round picks. But you also brought back Miles Bridges. Now, I did do these. I'm recording this video a little bit after Miles Bridges re-signed his extension. So let me just say this. Miles Bridges getting re-signed by the Charlotte Hornets. I'll say this goes up to a C+, B- kind of a deal where clearly they're in a rebuild, right? And this C was strictly based on Miles Bridges. They were kind of just letting him go for nothing. But he comes back. So again, I'll give this a C+, B- now that Miles Bridges is back in town. For the Wizards, I give him a C-, and this is the reason why. You bring in Jonas Valanciunas and Richaun Holmes. Sure, if you want to strictly bring them in because they're good veteran mouthpieces and they're going to help the development of Alex Sarr, I get that. But you also have lost Tyus Jones to this point, a guy that is leading the NBA in assist-to-turnover ratio every single year. And then you trade Denny Avdia for really nothing. I don't understand the notion of trading him. I understand that you still have Bilal Coulibaly that you want to develop and grow, but maybe there's just something behind the scenes that we don't know. But Denny Avdia, to me, was arguably their second best player last year, next to Kyle Kuzma, and then you trade him for nothing. So I don't know. Questionable move from the Wizards, but you had the number 2 overall pick. Should be interesting future for Alex Sarr this year. For the Pistons, they close off the Eastern Conference with an A-. You draft Ron Holland. You bring in JB Bickerstaff, which, as a Cavs fan, did he work here? No, he didn't. But in Detroit, huge. I think it was a huge move for him and for the development of some of your younger players. You also brought in Tobias Harris as a veteran guy, THJ for the same reason. Of course, Tim Hardaway Jr. Now, you did lose James Wiseman, but I think that's okay because you still have Beef Stew. You still have Jalen Duren. And this is a crew that I think with the addition of some of these veteran pieces, they can make a play and push next season. Now, is that their ceiling? Oh, that's debatable, but I think a play and push is definitely in the future of the Detroit Pistons. JB Bickerstaff is going to get these boys to play defense just like he did with the Cavaliers, and this is an offense that I think can explode under the development of a guy like JB Bickerstaff. Detroit, I think, they're heading in the right direction. That's the most important thing. Taking a quick recap here, look here. Of course, you see the teams in the A tier, the B tier, the C tier. where the Bucks, before they got Torian Prince, I had them in the D tier, so that's why it looks a little janky. And then for the Chicago Bulls, again, to be decided. But as of right now, maybe they're C, B minus kind of because they're heading in the right direction. But I want to see what the return packages look like for Zach LaVine, Lonzo Ball, and maybe Vucevic. Here in the Western Conference, of course, if you haven't noticed, we are going in order of how these teams finished last season. That's the luxury that you get here on this channel. Wherever you finish, that's the order we talk about you. But for the Oklahoma City Thunder, I gave him an A plus. This is a team that drafted Nikola Topic, a guy that fell into their laps at 12. They added, of course, Alex Caruso via trade. They for basically nothing, right? For a player that they couldn't really play in the postseason, a guy that had a terrible plus minus in Josh Giddey. You brought in Caruso for that. So all NBA defender now next to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and you still have a guy like Lou Dort. The defense, the offense, everything's going to be scary about the Thunder next year. Definitely title contenders. But you bring in Caruso, you bring in Isaiah Hartenstein to be that dominant, I guess, true center for you because Chet can play on the wing. He could be the center for you, but he can also be the four, which I think that's what they're going to experiment with this year, having Chet at the four, of course, to space the floor and an elite level. It's going to give this team so much versatility now with Isaiah Hartenstein. But also, you bring back Aaron Wiggins. You bring back Isaiah Joe. Of course, Isaiah Joe's a knockdown shooter. Aaron Wiggins, we haven't seen much out of him, but the potential, I guess, is there. They get an A+ for their offseason. Again, they're title contenders. For Denver, you brought in DeRon Holmes. You brought back DeAndre Jordan to be a Udonis Haslem kind of a player. You lost KCP and Reggie Jackson. This is a team that already struggled with depth. And now you're expecting your lineup next year to be what? Jamal Murray, Christian Braun to take a huge step up. And then, of course, you have MPJ, Gordon, and Jokic. This is a team going into next year. Their mindset's going to be, we have the best player in the world. Hopefully, he can be enough to take us over the top. But I just don't think that's going to be enough. They haven't brought in really any depth to, I guess, help their problem from last year. In fact, they've lost a lot more from their roster from last year. Guys like KCP, I guess key glue guys that they just decided not to bring back because of salary cap. The Denver Nuggets had a rough offseason, and unless they could start picking up some of these quality veterans or pull off a trade or two, I don't like their title opportunities next year. But again, they have Jokic, they have Jamal Murray, and of course the other glue guys in the starting lineup. They're going to be contenders, just not a great offseason. For the Timberwolves, you drafted Terrence Shannon and you traded for Rob Dillingham, a guy that was a top 10 overall pick, a guy that could have been a top 3 pick here in this draft class. Of course, point guard. You bring him in, and now he's going to replace Monte Morris, who took his talents elsewhere. Rob Dillingham, I think, was an amazing pickup. The Timberwolves arguably had the greatest draft because of the draft day trade and, of course, getting Terrence Shannon Jr., a talented wing shot creator, in the late first round, excuse me. So, again, great draft, and that really carries this grade here for the Timberwolves. But you add Luka Garza, solid, stretch big. He can play the bench, different lineups with Naz Reid, whatever, right? Luka Garza is Luka Garza. And then you also, again, you lost Monte Morris, but when you traded for him at the midseason mark, he didn't really do much for you. He was averaging 4 points a game for the Timberwolves. So, again, didn't do much. For the Clippers, just like the Atlanta Hawks, like I mentioned, they're taking the less is more approach, and they decided, it might be better not to bring back Paul George, instead to fully commit to Kawhi Leonard, which, right, again, that was the biggest piece they eventually went after when they signed him in, 2021, 2020. So let's fully commit around Kawhi Leonard, but in a different way this time. You re-signed James Harden, Russell Westbrook, but is he going to be traded? I don't know at this point. PJ Tucker opted into his deal, and then these are some shocking additions, but key additions, and I like these additions. But you bring in Kevin Porter. He returns to the NBA level. I'm excited to see what he can do. Talented shot creator, as long as he can keep his nose in the right direction. Derrick Jones, of course, solid wing defender. I love that move for the Clippers. You bring in Nick Batum. Of course, he has some continuity with this crew. Chris Dunn comes in to run the bench unit, and Mo Bamba as well. if you look at this like haul for Paul George in a sense, it might be better for the Clippers. Again, sometimes less is more. It all depends on the health of Kawhi Leonard. For the Mavericks, they had a very interesting offseason. You lost Derrick Jones, which hurts. And then you traded away THJ, a guy that's been there for almost feels like 10 years, right? But THJ, he's on and off, very inconsistent shooter. You get rid of him, right? Whatever. But here's where I think they had a great offseason. You signed Najee Marshall on a steal of a deal. If you watch Pelicans basketball last year, this is a very solid 3-and-D guy, but at times he was able to heat up for the Pelicans and give them, 10 to 15 points off the bench where, he was kind of just like let's give this team a different look. He was in there for defensive reasons, but he can go out there and spark and give you a quality three-point shooting, right? So I love the Najee Marshall, I guess, addition. Kind of reminds this team of the DFS days with Dorian Finney-Smith. You trade for Quentin Grimes for THJ, solid guard to run the bench unit, and then, of course, to replace Josh Green, which you had to trade for Klay Thompson, the first ever 6-team deal in NBA history. But Klay Thompson comes in, gives his team much needed veteranship, shooting, okay defense on the wing. He's not going to be at the Derrick Jones level, but the three-point shooting is miles above where Derrick Jones was. And make whatever jokes you want to make. 0 for 10. This is the guy that also put up 60 in a game. This is the guy that also put up 37 in a quarter. Klay Thompson is a legendary shooter, and he's going to provide that here for Luka and Kyrie. Interesting to see how he plays in that third tertiary role. For the Phoenix Suns, I bumped this rating up a little bit, but this is a team that, kind of just brought everybody back. They lost Eric Gordon, but they replaced him with Monte Morris. So again, for the Phoenix Suns, I guess let's run it back. But let me tell you something. Devin Booker is going to be underutilized this summer in Team USA ball. And he's going to come back and he's going to, I guess, shock a lot of people that Devin Booker is still a top 3 bucket getter here in the NBA today. I'm excited to see what Book can do in Team USA in a lesser role, excuse me. But this team just brought everybody back. They're hoping it can work. Again, this is very close to being a CC minus for me just because of the fact that we saw it work last year and it didn't. So unless Monte Morris is going to be the starting point guard and Bradley Beal is going to kind of, I guess, stagger his minutes to technically be a bench player, again, I don't like, exactly how their offseason went. But the Phoenix Suns, I guess maybe you can go into the next offseason a little bit happier because you added Monte Morris. Regardless, for the Los Angeles Lakers, they made some history, at least not yet, but they've already made somewhat history. They brought in Bronny James, of course, the son of LeBron James, first ever father-son duo in NBA history. Of course, we've seen that happen in the NHL and the MLB once or twice, most notably with the Griffins, right? Or the Griffies, excuse me. But you also brought in Dalton Kennett, a guy that fell into your laps at 17. I didn't think that was happening. I thought he was going to be a top 10 for sure pick, but some teams were worried about his age. Good thing for the Lakers, you're not worried about that. You get one of the most polished players right outside of the draft. Now, you brought in JJ Redick to be your head coach, a guy that started a podcast with LeBron, and no doubt he has a great mind for the game, but never did I think that JJ Redick would be a coach before another NBA player, let's say a guy like Rajon Rondo, right? But JJ Redick, here we are. He's the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. This team, of course, D'Lo opted into his deal. They brought back Jackson Hayes. They brought back Cam Reddish. What do you do with D'Angelo Russell? As of right now, it looks like he's going to be back in the Lakers uniform. But if you trade him, what for? For the Pelicans, you acquired DeJounte Murray in a very shocking deal where you didn't really give up much, but you bring in DeJounte Murray, a lot of defense and shot creation on the wing, and he's also a decent facilitator. So if you don't want to bring in another facilitator, DeJounte can solve a problem that this team has had the last couple of years with the BI and Zion duo. But they, of course, brought back Jose Alvarado on his team-friendly deal, and then they lost some quality pieces. Dyson Daniels, well, of course, was showing flashes last year. Larry Nance, solid, ideal big next to Zion. But that's the price for a DeJounte Murray. So, again, I give the advantage actually to the Pelicans in that situation. The only reason that this team is not in the A is because of the fact that they lost Jonas Valanciunas. Now, he's not a great player, but this team legitimately has no center on the roster. Are they expecting to run into the next year with Zion at the 5? I guess maybe, right? Because he plays like a center, but the height is going to be something that they got to deal with if they face a team like the Spurs, for example. How are they going to deal with Wembanyama? They don't have a guy that can really get even in his face to defend his shots. Something like that I worry about, but they still have some time to go out there and address the center position. Something interesting to look at. But that's the only reason they don't have an A, is because they don't really have a center on the roster. For the Sacramento Kings, I think they're big winners. This could be an A honestly in my books. But you, of course, re-sign Malik Monk, a guy that most people thought was gone for sure. But you re-sign Malik Monk, Six-Man of the Year candidate, year in, year out. You trade for Jalen McDaniels on a steal of a deal for Davion Mitchell. And then, of course, you trade Harrison Barnes and a plethora of other things for DeMar DeRozan. So now you have a lineup where you added DeMar DeRozan to it, and you didn't have to trade Keegan Murray or a guy like Malik Monk. So now you have a lineup of De'Aaron Fox, probably Keon Ellis for the defense, DeMar DeRozan, Keegan Murray, and Domantas Sabonis with Malik Monk off the bench. I can promise you some other guys are going to want to join this team on either buyout deals or vet minimum deals. This Sacramento Kings team is fun. And I think I guess I know their ceiling is probably only the second round, but they're going to be a fun second round team if that is the case. For the Golden State Warriors, you lost Klay Thompson. And for the sentimental factor, I want to give this team an F. I want to give them a D minus because they let go of maybe the greatest trio of all time, depending on who you ask. But at the end of the day, Klay Thompson wanted to move on, and it kind of made sense for both sides outside of the sentimental factor to move on from Klay Thompson. But this is a team that I think rebounded fairly nicely. No pun intended. You bring in Gary Payton, of course, back. You bring in DeAnthony Melton for the bench unit. You bring in Buddy Hield, a guy that has more three-pointers than Steph Curry since 2020, believe it or not. Now, again, Curry missed some time, but I just want to throw that factor out there. And then Slow-Mo Anderson. So it gives this team a different look off the bench. This team is going to clearly start, of course, Steph Curry, Kevon Looney, Draymond Green, and AirPods, and Andrew Wiggins. But on this bench unit, and sometimes in starting lineups, you now have a lot of flexibility and versatility that you can mix and match different pieces in the lineup, and you can match up with other teams fairly well. Interested to see what the Warriors would do. I would like to see them get another quality big man. It would be nice to have a James Wiseman at this point, I can tell you that. But for the Warriors, you get a B for, I guess, dealing with the circumstances that you had. For the, of course, the Houston Rockets, you get a B+. You drafted Reed Sheppard third overall. You re-signed Jae'Sean Tate, Jeff Green, Aaron Holiday. You brought everybody back. You didn't panic. You didn't trade your young core to make a playoff push. I'm excited to see what Ime Udoka can continue to do with a healthy Houston Rockets core. They just need time to develop and grow together as a team. For the Jazz, you might have had the best draft, if not the best draft. You got Cody Williams, Isaiah Collier, and then in the second round, you get a guy that was supposed to be a lottery pick in Kyle Flipkowski out of Duke. So I love the the draftees for the Utah Jazz. You also added Drew Eubanks. Now, I think they're in a position to where if you want to trade Walker Kessler, you can get a first-round pick for him from a team like, let's say, the New York Knicks. This is something interesting to look out for. But if on the Jazz, again, you didn't panic. You didn't trade Kessler. You didn't trade Laurie. But I'm interested to see if they do decide to do that before the season comes around. But great offseason for the Jazz so far. For the Grizzlies, salary cap reasons, you couldn't do anything. And I'm not going to give you a pass just because of salary cap. You drafted Zach Edey, solid addition. He's going to replace Steven Adams until he can come back. And then, of course, you lost Luke Kennard temporarily. And Yuta Watanabe. Nothing really happened for the Memphis Grizzlies. And I think, I'll say this, Grizzlies fans, I think you're a contender next season with even a D+ offseason. But as far as the offseason, the draft, free agency, you didn't do much. Aside from get healthy, right? And, of course, stay off of Instagram Live. For the Spurs, I love their offseason, man. They drafted Stephon Castle. I think he if he doesn't start from day one, he'll definitely come off the bench. And, of course, run that second unit. This is a team that added Harrison Barnes in that DeMar DeRozan trade. And this is a team now that has a lineup of, let's say, Chris Paul at the one, Devin Vassell, of course, Jeremy Sohan, Harrison Barnes, and Victor Wembanyama. Of course, off the bench, you still have guys like Keldon Johnson and Stephon Castle that can, of course, grow, develop into their own. Julian Champagne. This Spurs team is heading in the right direction, and I'm excited to see how quickly Wemby can turn into that face of the league kind of a player. How quickly is he going to enter his prime is my question here. Because if he can enter it, let's say next season, this could be a play-in team. For the Portland Trailblazers, I give him an A minus because you didn't panic, and if anything, you got better this offseason. You stuck with your young core. You added Donovan Clingan, of course, and then you add Bob Carrington, excuse me. You traded for Denny Abdia for Malcolm Brogdon, a guy that you really only got to be a veteran mouthpiece anyway. I love the offseason for the Portland Trailblazers, and of course, you just filled the holes that you had. Here, of course, you see a quick recap. The B tier, of course, a lot of teams. The D tier, Denver and the Memphis Grizzlies. I'll say this again, sentimentally, I want to have the Warriors at an F because they practically didn't bring back a guy that's going to have a statue made and a jersey retired in Golden State. But I understand that sentimental is not always everything. And outside of that, given their situation, I think that was a pretty great offseason. Episode 189 in the books. If you enjoyed, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. You at least did a little bit if you're still here. But again, on Thursday, we're going to be doing our NFC West predictions for every single team in that division. And then that's going to close off our series of going through every single NFL team. And then we have some fun stuff planned for you throughout the month of August. So if you're interested, check that out Thursday. And then in August, a lot of fun content on the way. But again, support the channel down below. Tell a friend to tell a friend. We're on the road to 20K.